All right, we are live, and today I'm with Jim Kalbach from Mural. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Douglas. Hey, everybody.
It's good to be with you. And with such an exciting topic to talk about today, and near and dear to my heart are just some concepts that you laid out in a LinkedIn post. I think fairly recently around um, uh, these paradoxes that exist in I think in any company that is seeking to innovate, they have to embrace these paradoxes, and I think it'd be fun to just dive into these and talk about them a little bit more, and maybe even hear from some of our listeners here today around their thoughts on what these mean and how they show up for them.
Yeah, sure. It's a topic I'd love to talk about. So happy to explore it with you.
Yeah, cool. You know, when you first mentioned this to me, and I was taking a look at the LinkedIn post, it reminded me of Liberating Structures, integrated autonomy. Which is like a specific method to help teams explore paradoxes, or these wicked questions, like how can we both be X versus Y? And the classic example is how are we both integrated and
Right.
autonomous? Because we need to
Right.
be both at the same time. And I think your five paradoxes kind of are on the nose as far as that kind of behavior, how we support both, and also they're very critical to support innovation and design thinking or any of this kind of imagination work that Mural is so
Right.
supportive of.
Yeah, particularly for imagination work, and I think that's where this thinking kind of came about. Innovation and creativity. It's not black or white, and very often management theory and management practice wants us to have a list of the 5 top behaviors that a high performing team displays, and then you check them off. But then you go back to your team and you're like, yeah, my real world doesn't match what I just learned in that training or from that blog post. So I wanted to kind of bring this notion of a constant struggle or striving towards better collaboration with this notion of paradoxes, which, as you point out, is really the ability to hold multiple truths at the same time, even if they're opposing truths, right? Like the first one is serious play. Can we be serious and playful at the same time? Those things aren't mutually exclusive. That when you have the idea of serious play, it's like, oh, that's a thing that has two ends of a spectrum that we need to address at the same time, right?
That's right. And I think that serious, playful uh, paradox is a really powerful one because so often, we get caught up in these notions of what's professional and we have to be buttoned up or
Right,
be
right.
reserved. And I don't know how many workshop facilitators I've run into, and I'm sure it's the same for you, but are like, oh, I could never do that with an executive.
Right, yeah. No, well, no. In fact, I find that just the opposite is true. And you might know, Douglas, we have this warm up that we call "Pick Your Nick," right? Where we have these 9 Nicolas Cage characters, and before you start a meeting, you do this warm up, right? You're like, "Oh, I would never do that with an exec." The execs that I've done that with love it more than everybody else. And you know what? They don't want to live in bullet points and spreadsheets either, right? And you know what, business thinking or CEO thinking, whatever you want to call that, making important business decisions needs to be creative, and they need to be using their imagination as well too. So all of the good principles of setting the expectations for collaboration apply from the unpaid intern to the CEO. They all have to be able to open up their mind and be playful and ready to explore, right?
100%. And I think you hit a really key word there, which is setting the expectations. Because so often the reason that people shy away from the play or get a bit worried or afraid is because the expectation, the intent hasn't been
Right.
communicated. And then it's like, wait, what are we doing? Why are you forcing me into this weird, uncomfortable area?
Yeah.
And you're right. And you're right. If things are set up right, if the expectations are set, they typically love it the most because they
Right.
get to do it the least.
Yeah, agree. But it's still serious because you're using a playful mindset, not to goof around. When we say play, we're not talking about foosball tables and finger painting in the corner. It's play in the sense of discovery and exploration and creativity. that play, when you think of games, games have rules, by the way, right? And following, just like your good well-structured workshop has rules, but it's playful in between. And that's where imagination and creativity can happen in order to get those serious outcomes that you want to have, right? So seriousness and playfulness are not, it's not an either or, that you need to be able to hold both of those truths at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that gets to the spirit of the paradox, right? It's like if people put these on opposite ends
Right.
in their mindsets, then let's just kind of explore what it's like to maybe find some kind of middle ground there,
Right.
and then that invites a conversation versus
Sure.
like like this binary, like yes, one or zero. And Eric kind of asked here around how he gets the CEO to open up and play. I think we spoke to that a little bit. And I believe that the intention and the expectations is the way that you explain to them that this is serious.
Right.
That way they understand the importance, the objectives of it. Do you have any other tips before we move
Yeah, I
on?
mean, I think setting and I mentioned very briefly that games are playful and they have rules, and I think having an established playing field and a set of rules of engagement are important way for establishing serious play, and that you're not just doing an exercise that may be playful for itself, or for personal reasons, or for the atmosphere of the room. There's actually something productive in it that you're getting from point A to point B by following those rules of engagement within a playful context. But it's that context that's different. You'll come to different outcomes, right? If you just flash up bullet points and look at spreadsheets and say, where's our business opportunity? Right. You're not going to get that imagination. You have to open up the imagination and what could be our business opportunity? How might we beat the competition? Right. So you can have serious targets, but in a playful wrapper. And I've like you said, I've not found that CEOs don't want to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, they want it more than other people sometimes.
What you were just saying reminded me of an awesome litmus for facilitators, and that's if anytime you do anything, whether it's a warm up or something kind of playful in your method or your approach, when you're done with that, if you ask the group, why did we just do that? And it
Right.
doesn't erupt into a pithy conversation. You should be asking yourself, why did we
Right.
just do that? Because it probably means you jammed something into the agenda that didn't belong, or you
Agree.
didn't set the expectations. And so that's kind of a fun little test just to if you're
Agree.
exploring and
Yeah.
learning. Yeah.
Yeah, and as a facilitator too, it's multi-layered. That on the surface of things, it might seem like you're just moving around colorful shapes or something like that. But there's actually underneath, there's actually something that's additive. And if you do that plus the next one, then you'll get from point A to point B. And it's those kind of substrates that a facilitator really builds into those to those exercises and collaboration engagements. Yeah.
In all seriousness, too, the that question around why did we just do that? It's a powerful question because debriefing
Yeah.
is super powerful, and so that can
Yeah.
sometimes expose some of the magician work you're doing as a facilitator.
Yeah.
If people start to talk about those things
Correct.
and internalize it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I'm really bad at, Douglas, is building in time for reflection inside of my workshops. And, I really, when I look at my colleagues like Amelia Ostrom and Lila, who went to Hyper Island, that's a huge part of Hyper Island, is always time for reflection. And I think that's important, a part of the wrapper here. It's serious play, but then you reflect on that, right? And if somebody says, well, it wasn't serious enough, then you can, okay, well, what are the business outcomes? That reflection is a way to calibrate this balance that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, and I had this comment up from Jay for a minute now, and he was I think responding to Eric's question, but it's a nice segue to another one of your 5 paradoxes, and because he's talking about the culture that allows people to generate the ideas, and often we talk about psychological safety as a way to create a culture that allows people to generate ideas,
right.
And you had this interesting one, which is like we're going to support empathy and provocation at the same time. So like we're gonna hug the bear and we're gonna poke the bear at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And in that context, for empathy, I mean, obviously for customers and users and things like that, but I mean for your teammates as well too. Just empathetic. are designers empathetic for what engineers, what concerns they have? And are they empathetic for the financial concerns in the discussion, right? And the ability to empathize with the others around you in a team that's collaborating and trying to innovate, to have that type of empathy, but also the psychological. So I think psychological safety is a part of it, because you can't be provocative unless you are confident enough to raise your hand and say, I object, or, here's another opinion, right? So this idea of being empathetic of your teammates and you're in it together, right? But it's not just about harmony and rainbows. It's about you trying to bring your unique perspective to the table as well, too, particularly from a discipline or function standpoint, and being able to negotiate that in sometimes a provocative way. Right, to just call BS on your teammates, but then go have a beer with them. They're not going to hate you for that. They'll actually thank you for that. But thanks for pointing me out. And that kind of culture, I think, is that's kind of the ideal culture that you want, is that empathetic provocation.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the ground rules, or one of the operating agreements that we love to use in our workshops, which is to be hard on ideas and soft on people.
Right. Yeah, agree. And to be focused on your outcome. That's why, they say, what are the goals and the outcomes of the collaboration or the workshop? I think it is really important as well, too, because I could totally respect you. I could totally have empathy for your position and say, if we're here together for this common purpose to reach that objective, and I bring my perspective to the table aligned to that thing, I should be able to have the confidence to speak up without fear of repercussion or anything like that as well, too. So psychological safety absolutely underlies empathetic provocation, the way that I view it.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point there too, around the shared values that people are bringing into the collaboration. And I found that sometimes, especially when you're getting to larger and larger groups, you may realize that there are subgroups with like sub purposes or varied needs. And if you understand that ahead of time, then you can design accordingly, right?
Right.
You might intentionally mix up the groups so that you get some cross-pollination. You
Yeah.
might separate them because they're at different maturity curves, or the one's tactical and one's strategic.
Yeah.
And you can't do that unless you understand that stuff ahead of time. And because you want the provocation can't be empathetic if we don't understand each other, because empathy starts with understanding, right?
Yeah, agree. And, just to tie it back into the other point we were making, play or playfulness is a way that you can get those different perspectives out on the table in a non-threatening way as well too. So we were talking about setting expectations. That's something like a simple, harmless warm-up. It isn't just to get your blood going. It's also to say, hey, we're here together and here are all these different perspectives. Let's respect all those different perspectives, and to start getting that out on the table so that you can have empathetic provocation.
100%. And it's I want to try to hit on a couple more of these before we run out of time here. And so planned spontaneity is like super cool. And especially in the virtual world that we find ourselves in, there's all these spontaneous moments that people are trying to recreate. So I'm sure people are a little bit more familiar. It's not quite as absurd sounding as it might have been like 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
But even so, even beyond just the water cooler moments, we still have to find time to plan it, to schedule it, and then allow the emergent qualities to still present themselves.
Yeah. And I think this is one that is more relevant now because of the pandemic than in the past. And one thing that I learned earlier in 2021, when earlier in the year, when in the fall people were expecting to open their offices again, I was talking to a large customer of ours here at Mural, and I asked the question, why do you want to open your office at all? And they didn't have a real good answer. And they literally said, this is not a joke, those water cooler moments, we want them back, right? And what I started to realize was that the physical office space was actually a management tool, because it was a way that organizations figured out that they could have these unplanned moments and they could also coordinate people. So the office was a management tool in order to coordinate people, right? I worked over here. I'd go over there and I'd have a meeting in that room, and I'd go back over there where I work, and then I'd meet my colleagues, at the water cooler in the office. And without that tool, without that office, people didn't know how to have those social interactions or those types of relationships. It literally just went away, and they couldn't imagine any way to do it. So planned spontaneity for me is super hyper relevant right now, as we live in a completely remote or hybrid world, or whatever the future is going to bring us as well too. Because without that office, how do you have the quote unquote water cooler conversations and those moments where you get to know each other at a personal level, at a social level? Because one thing that we found, Douglas, is that work is social. You can't get away from that fact that people are human beings, and they bring their whole selves to work, and work and collaboration has a social component to it. And people miss that. That was one of the things that they missed the most during the pandemic. And we know that from a survey that we do every year, that spontaneous collaboration, meeting colleagues, and having those side conversations was one of the biggest things that people missed during the pandemic.
Yeah, not surprising. We heard the word connection a lot. In fact,
Right.
It was the theme for our conference last year, and people missed it, and we're really hungry for it. So it's not surprising it comes up in those environments as well.
Yeah. And I think that's where you gain empathy for your colleagues as well too. You're not going to gain empathy for your colleagues only if you're talking about work. It's those, again, quote unquote, the water cooler is a metaphor here, right? It's those water cooler moments that help you understand that person as a human being and their perspective as well too. So when I think about planned spontaneity, there's actually a range of things that you can do, from company event or company retreat to team building things to just daily interactions. And even just playing games together, and getting together and doing a virtual happy hour or a virtual karaoke or playing some online game together. Those types of things, all for me would go under this kind of planned spontaneity that take the place of the happy hours and the lunchtime conversations and the water cooler conversations.
Yeah, I think there's also a version of this that can be more structured. If we leave room for the spontaneity, right? So, our weekly leadership meeting, I would say 3/4 of it is emergent. Like we decide what we're going to talk about during the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But there's kind of some scaffolding so that we're not just like kind of looking around going, what are we going to do? But it allows for a bit of spontaneity, and it's not quite the water cooler moment. But it's still, I think, a much needed tool when we're thinking about innovation, right? Let's not program everything down to the minute of topic. Let's allow some of it to be emergent and what's bugging people, or what they feel like, what do we need to address right now?
Right. Yeah. One thing that we've been tossing around here, I don't know where this is going yet, so it's kind of a new idea out here. We call it meeting tailgating. Like a tailgate in the US is where you go to a sporting event in advance. And sometimes you have that where people show up to the meeting a little bit early, and then they're just chit-chatting about the weather. You and I just did that a little bit. It's like, well, why not? Let's have a meeting and just plan this tailgating, or maybe it's a post-tailgate thing where, hey, the meeting's over. Anybody just want to stick around and talk about the weather? And actually, and that's what planned spontaneity is to account for that in your workflow, in your daily motions, right?
Yeah, it's like it reminds me of something that I started doing right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's still a tradition, because when we were doing workshops in person, there was always post-it notes to clean up, and Sharpies scattered everywhere, and we had to stick around and put those things away and tidy up the space so that our venue appreciated us, and so always someone stuck around. Sometimes everyone, but at least 1, 2, 3, 4 people would stick around and ask questions and hang out and just chit chat.
Yeah.
And so we always schedule 30 extra minutes at the end of virtual workshop that we hold, and we call it the after hours or the cleanup time or whatever. And we just kind of hang out and some people enjoy that as much as, especially some of our weekly facilitation labs, they enjoy the after hours more than the actual session, because it's when you get to hang out and just be with your friends.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, again, so planned spontaneity is just using your imagination to not necessarily recreate things one to one. So you don't need a water cooler per se, but what is it about those moments and how can you bake that into some of the things you do? Just that was a great, perfect example, Douglas.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time. I did want to throw
right,
out
man.
real quick the last one, which is like predictive adaptation, and which is like that one maybe I think people would struggle with just on the surface. Like, what does it mean?
Yeah.
How can we predictively adapt? Because adapting is something that is truly emergent.
Right.
And when I heard it, I thought about the just evolutionary biology concept of, you know, the more adapted we become, the less adaptable we are. So if we put ourselves in situations or design our interactions or our approaches so that they can adapt, we give that space for it
Right.
to happen, then
Correct.
maybe that's how we predict. But are there tools?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think, for me, predictable adaptation actually has, I think, a little bit more parallels with like improv, comedy improv. But for me, because I'm a jazz musician, like jazz improvisation. And you think like jazz improvisation, jazz musicians are just making up what they want. It's like, no, there's actually a lot of structure. There's actually rules. You can actually go to college and study this, and you can practice the ability to improvise. And that's kind of more of what I meant with predictable adaptation, is the fact that a flexible, nimble, agile mindset is something that you can actually rehearse and practice and go over. And it's, guess what? It's these playful moments. It's these provocative moments. It's these spontaneous spaces that we create for ourselves that allow us to actually practice these muscles of adaptation.
Yeah, it's that, I guess it's a mindset toward change.
Correct.
And being curious and willing to think about, hey, what if I'm wrong?
Right.
Or what if this is different, and
right.
being attuned to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to give a workshop on, I wrote a book on navigation design, and one of the exercises was you create a wireframe. Like I go through, principles of navigation design, blah, 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 and then create a wireframe. And I'd have all the students, heads down, individually create this wireframe on a physical piece of paper. And then I put a garbage can in the middle of the room and I said, now crumple that up and do another one. Right. And everybody would throw it was kind of symbolic, right? Everybody would throw their sketch that they were attached to. And I was like, I don't care if you're attached to it. You're throwing that one up. I want a completely different thing. And then they would do that and say, okay, throw that away. I want another one as well, too. So just things like that force you to think of, oh, wait, that first idea that I had, that's not the only thing. I got to think of another one and 6 and 12 different versions of that. That's just an example of practicing to be adaptable.
I love that, Jim. And we often talk about, when you make an agenda, is like throw your first and second agendas away. And then, no matter what happens, you at least got 3 ways to do it.
Exactly.
And, it also reminds me of this notion of one of the biggest impediments to innovation is the first good idea.
Right. Yeah.
Because if you get the first good idea and you're willing to accept that, then you're probably not going to find the truly novel.
That may be the best idea, but I want the other 5 ideas so that I know I've explored the way not to do it. But what I find most often, Douglas, is that if you have an idea and then you have 5 other ones, sometimes it's the 7th idea.
Yeah.
It's the one you did. There's not any of those. It's a combination of those and then something else. But you're not going to get to that 7th idea if you just stop at the first one.
That's right. That's right. It's so good. And I think, that's, if you really boil down design thinking, that's one of the things that really excels at, is helping people not stop at the first idea. We're looking at the intersectionality, like when we're starting to explore, hey, what if we combine different things together, like, and just sitting with the problem long enough for those other things to emerge.
What else? What else? What else might be true? How might we? I mean, all of those things help that mindset. Yeah.
I love it. Awesome. Well, we got through 4 of them. If you want to check out the 5th one, we'll put the link in.
Put a link up there. Yeah.
There and go
I got the link in the show notes. Can I point down like they do on YouTube?
For sure. Okay. Excellent. Well, Jim, it was a pleasure chatting with you as always, and hopefully we'll see you around sometime soon.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for listening in.